Hey everyone, welcome back to the Mindful Journey podcast. I'm your host, Sana, as always, and as you all know, listeners, this is the space where we zoom out from the daily chaos and zoom in on what actually makes a life feel rich, grounded, and meaningful through our incredible guests' journeys. Now, today for this episode, listeners, we are talking about something everyone thinks they want, but honestly, no one really understands longevity. Now, it's not just adding candles to the cake, but it is actually being alive in those extra years instead of just existing in a hospital gown. You, there's a quote from Adlai Stevenson. Hope I'm not butchering the pronunciation here. It is not the years in your life, but the life in your years that counts. And that hits different, listeners, because when you look at people who have crossed 100 and they are still cracking jokes, still curious, still here. So, what are they doing that rest of us are not? Is it genes? Is it green juice? Good luck? Or is it habits and mindset that we can actually learn and apply? Well, to unpack this, I'm so happy to have with me Judy Gaman. Judy is the CEO of Executive Medicine of Texas. She is an award winning author, a speaker, and host of the Stay Young America podcast. She has a serious passion for helping people live longer and healthier. She does not just quote studies, listeners, she turns science into stories. Now, Judy has spent years in the space where medicine, lifestyle, and real human behavior intersect. She works with executives, high performers, and everyday people who are trying to extend their health span, not just their lifespan. So, with that, Judy, welcome to the Mindful Journey, and I'm really, really glad that you are here with us today.
Oh, I'm so glad to be on to you. I love your introductions and your outros. It's they're so well thought out, and I love to listen to them, and it really shows that you have such a great passion for what you do, and it warms my heart to be able to be on this podcast with you.
Thank you so much, Judy. That really, really means a lot. And okay, so let's begin with because you have studied and you have spent time learning from people who live past 100. So when you look at centenarians as a group, what are the specific habits that keep showing up again and again? And it's not that they're healthy, but are there any actual patterns or behaviors that we as everyday people we can also start?
This is such a great question about the patterns. And let me tell you a little story. When I was working on a book called Age to Perfection: How to Thrive to 100, Happy, Healthy, and Wise, because longevity is kind of our space. You mentioned, we had the Stay in America podcast and executive medicine. We're really in that space all the time. So we thought, let's reach people that we maybe wouldn't normally reach and be able to have a book for them
Mm.
to kind of follow on some of these things. So I was working on that book, and this is, several years back, and at the time, I was really studying the blue zones and kinda looking at some of the research that's already out there. What helps people live to be 100, and, what are those patterns? What are their lifestyle, their diets, their stress levels, all of those things. So as I was doing none other than just kinda regurgitating the existing research, I had this epiphany that why don't I just go and ask the people that are 100 years old how they did it? Why don't I just have these conversations? And at the time, I had a research assistant, and I told her about my idea, and she said, "Oh, that's a good idea." I said, "Okay, well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go out and find the people over 100. I want to be able to interview them and get them all on the schedule for the next month."
Mm.
And, try to find people that are drooling on themselves that actually can carry on a conversation. Because my idea of what we would find locally over 100 wasn't matching up with what I knew was happening in certain parts of the world, which we call these blue zones, where people just really thrive well into 100 and past. So I was so shocked and so surprised that literally 2 days later, she's like, "Okay, here's my list, but boy, you gotta meet this one. You gotta meet this girl, Lucille Fleming. You will not believe it. She is 100 years old, and getting on her calendar was crazy because she plays duplicate bridge, and she can't meet with you if the Ranger game is on because she's a huge baseball fan." And I mean, the list went on and on and on about her schedule. And I really was fascinating. But as I interviewed these people, including Lucille, which we can talk a little bit more about, but as I interviewed these people, there were commonalities. There was something that they understood, maybe innately, because they didn't grow up in the same place. Like Lucille was from Canada. A couple of the people that I interviewed originally were from the North, even though I was interviewing them. Most of them in Texas, but they weren't all in Texas.
Mhm.
Some of them grew up in the deep South and then eventually had migrated locally. But I was visiting with these these wonderful human beings that had so much life and could just tell stories with the best of them. And the memories were like steel traps, and they just loved in their family, and they had a joy about them. But as I asked them kind of like, "What's your top 10 list for living to 100?" There were commonalities. The one which it doesn't surprise me at all, and it does match with science that we know, but one of those things was that they all believed in a higher power. I didn't have one interview who didn't bring this up. And it wasn't that they were all the same religion at all. They came from all different backgrounds. But the idea that they didn't have to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders, and also the idea that at 100, their their entire existence wasn't gonna be over the day they died. It was very fascinating to hear them talk about their life and their hope even at 100 that they would wake up the next day, and if they didn't, that'd be okay too. You know, it was really a calming, almost spiritual experience to have these conversations. Another thing that came up with all of them across the board was that they said you gotta have a social group, you gotta have friends. They talked a lot about the people that they hung out with. Lucille once gave me great advice. She said, "You always gotta have younger friends. The older you get, the younger your friends gotta be." Because, you know, otherwise you just spend your time going to funerals. I thought that was interesting insight. And the fact that she knew she could hang, as they say, and have conversations with people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever decade of life. She was really having great conversations and she could relate because she had made it a point of being able to do so. And this was, across the board, they were mentioning things like this. Of course, there were the usual exercise. I remember this one lady, oh, she just cracked me up. She really was, she was an African American lady, and she had a lot of labor in her younger years. She had labored a lot, and she said that that physicality actually had kept her young and healthy for so long. So as she got into different stages in her life and her life had changed, over the years, she always made sure that she was still bending over and she was still reaching for things and was getting her, as we say, steps in. She was doing these things. And that just told me something interesting. She said when gyms came out. Now imagine for a minute that there are people that like lived when we didn't have gyms. I mean,
Yeah.
it it kinda you kinda go, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense," but we don't really think about it. That people got all of their exercise, 99% of their exercise was outside, which is, of course, a healthier way to get it. But she did say when gyms came out, she loved them because she could put weights on the gym, the different pieces of equipment, and she could strengthen her muscles, and she could stay strong that way. And then she said as she got older, she could do less and less weight, she said, but Now I go and I do the rotations at the gym. I do every machine on the rotation. I just don't put the weight on it. But it keeps my, she says, keeps my machine oiled. You gotta keep the joints oiled. And I just thought that is so intuitive. She doesn't understand or know the science behind that, but she knew that movement was so important and she made that part of her life. So those were some of the real unique or maybe not so unique lists that they were giving. There's other things. But as we got to the end, right before we published the book, I asked my research assistant again. I said, I had another idea and it came to me in my sleep. I would be curious to go into an elementary school and ask these young kids what they think it takes to live to be 100. And she thought it was funny, and I'm like, "I don't know what they're gonna say, but I'm just curious."
Mhm.
So, sure enough, one of the teachers was so grateful, to have us, and I was so grateful to be able to be there and have a conversation with these kids. And the kids gave us the most insightful answers, and they're insightful because they matched almost verbatim what these 100-year-olds knew. They said things like, "Oh, I gotta go to church, or I say my prayers, or I gotta have a lot of friends." They talked about eating fruits and vegetables. They talked about all of the same things that these people over 100 knew. And I kind of deduced from this that we know innately, we know what's good for us, we know what's bad for us. And if we can hold on to what we know as children is important. Right from wrong is almost like ingrained in a child. They know when they did wrong, even before they can speak and carry on conversations and be able to rationalize what it is. They know. I mean, we see this in toddlers. They know they're not supposed to touch something. They look back, and they kind of give you the look when they know they weren't supposed to do it. We do know what is good for us and what isn't good for us. So what is it? And this is really a question I'd love to for you to kind of jump in and talk about. What is it about the world that takes this from us so often, distracts us from this? Is it the constant bombardment of commercials? Is it the idea that the more we have, the materialistic ideas that we have? What do you think that kind of breaks that chain of what we know when we're young, and the people that hold on to it tend to live a lot longer, happier, and healthier?
Well, that's actually a difficult question, and that's the fact that, I sometimes really wish that, and I think this is so much common, especially among adults, that, we yearn those childhood years. Um, Not dismissing, of course, the difficult times or maybe something else, but I think we just want our tensions and worries to diminish or maybe just to not to exist. We just want to be, you know, okay, I don't want to live in that state of um worry or anxiety or exhaustion that today if I'm happy then tomorrow something bad is going to happen. I think that kind of keeps us stuck in that loop. And then I think right now with all the circumstances and everything, as as adults, when we are getting exposed to everything, we kind of, I mean, it becomes like a rabbit hole that we think about, okay, let me work on the solution, and then simultaneously there's this another problem that's creeping out of some dark corner with um webs and everything. So I think um and that's why we feel looking at the kids, that, oh my goodness, they're so happy. They don't have anything to worry about. Why can't I be in that same place? And I think that is something that really keeps us, thinking that, why can't my tensions just Why can't I eliminate all the tensions and be, at least just behave like a kid?
Yeah, I think that so many, people yearn for that same thing. And you're right. I mean, there's times like puberty. There's times that are really tough growing up, but it's that simplicity. And I think that the people who tend to live really long, healthy lives, they find a way to get back to that simplicity. It wasn't that they didn't have struggles. Trust me. Oh my gosh, these people told me stories that you wouldn't believe what they lived through. Lucille, I went on to write a memoir about my time with her because we spent 4 years together. She actually went out on book tour with me,
Mhm.
when I finished the Age of Perfection book. Traveling around with and on and off the airplanes with somebody over 100 is just a hoot. First of all, they look at the date of birth at TSA and they're like, "Wait, this can't be right." She's like, "No, it's right." You know? I'm 102, and it's fascinating people's reactions, how they just are almost like Lucille was a magnet. People would just really want to come up to her, even those that didn't even know she was 100. She was just a magnet because she was so full of life. And I think that is one thing that as we all age, we don't want our light to dim. And we really want to still be vibrant in that way. But I wrote a memoir called Love, Life, and Lucille, and really I really think that Lucille Fleming changed my life. I was a third generation workaholic, and she really just changed not just my life, but the trajectory of the family about getting out of the trap of you have to be working all the time. And she showed me how to really enjoy other people. And she really taught me how to live, honestly. And I'm so grateful. And, in the memoir, I share funny stories. People have written me letters, or you can read some of the reviews online where like, oh my gosh, it was an emotional, reading this book was an emotional roller coaster. Or, I never laughed so hard and then been so mad and wanted to throw the book, but then couldn't put it down. And, all of that. But I think the beauty of that with that memoir was really that it was a bit of a metaphor for life. There's times in our life when things are fun and funny and we are just on top of the world. There's times when things are rough and we don't really know how we're going to get through. There's times when we're mad, there's times when we're happy, when we're sad, when all of those emotions. And I think that so one thing that really shines through in Love, Life, and Lucille, but it also is a very important lesson that I learned from my time with Lucille, and that is the human experience is the same, regardless of what part of the world we live in,
Mm.
regardless of which decade we were born in, regardless of our social economic status, because we all know what pain feels like. Well, we're all going to experience it, whether that's emotional pain, physical pain. We all have been happy. Something has brought us joy. Something has touched our heart. We all have faced disappointment. Maybe that's disappointment in somebody we love. Maybe it's disappointment in the world around us. Maybe it's disappointment in ourselves. But we've all faced that. And there's that human experience is really, if you do it right, and I say do it right because the people that I talk to, they didn't have any shortfalls when it comes to heartache. They didn't, they experienced all of these things, but they saw them as the collage of life. They saw them as a bigger picture. And these were just brushstrokes on a canvas, each thing. And I love that I got to experience that. And it really changed me forever.
It does reflect, Judy. So many thoughts and emotions within me, and um, it must have been so beautiful and interesting to sit with these souls these beacons of light and life and love and energy. Um, and for the fact I've got to, I've, I mean, I'm really thankful that I get to actually connect with people from all the corners of the world and from different cities, from different backgrounds. In fact, I had interviewed people who are 83, 85, and even I would feel in front of them, being younger to them. I mean, sometimes I really get to see the energy that they radiate. It's visible. I can feel it. Even though I'm connecting them with them through Zoom or virtually, I can still feel that energy that they are, exhibiting. So it's there. And another thing which I also absolutely believe very strongly, and these are in fact two things. One is simplicity. Very, very strongly believe in simplicity. Sometimes, yes, life is complicated. However, I think I also believe that if I am giving my 100% efforts, maybe some part of it has to be left with the higher power out there. Some kind of surrendering, and surrendering has to be there because not everything is within our control. So I think I absolutely so much agree with and in fact that you got to sit with Lucille, and now I kind of understand this entire background behind it. So it's really heartening, very, very um endearing to know for the fact.
Well, when I did the audiobook,
Mhm.
so I had the print and the digital book, but when I sat down to the audiobook, I
Mhm.
had a I had an idea to have a dear friend of mine who also knew Lucille, who is, very much up in age. I wanna say she might be 90 now. I'm not sure, but she's definitely got some years on her, and I just love her to death. Her name is Faye. I asked her if, I said, "I'd like to pay you to do a job."
Mhm.
And I said, "I know you would probably do this without being paid, but I wanna pay you because I want this to go on your resume," which kinda was a joke between us, right? And I said, "I wanna record the book in my own voice, but I want you only to record anything Lucille said, anything that's quoted by Lucille, I want you to do."
Mhm.
And it wasn't something that's done a lot on audiobooks. I was so taken back, um, on how well she delivered those lines. It was as if Lucille was in the room.
Mhm.
And there's one chapter in the book which is called The God Story, and it was probably the most near and dear chapter,
Mhm.
in the whole book, and one of my favorite memories. And we did a lot of really cool things, Lucille and I, but this particular day, we were just in the car having a conversation about God,
Mhm.
and it was I can remember like it was yesterday. And I had my headset on, and we were recording in the studio, and Faye had her headset on.
Mhm.
And when she delivered those lines, they were identical. The inflection, every single thing was identical to that conversation, to the point where I had to take my headset off. I had to go in the hallway and take a break. And later, some family members of Lucille were listening to the audiobook, and they were just shocked at how how much the audiobook, and particularly Faye's delivery of those lines was like listening to their mother or grandmother. And I'm so grateful for that. And I said, "How did you know to say that like that?" She said, "I don't know. I just felt like that's how she would have said it." And I say that because if you get the chance to listen to the audiobook, take a minute when you get to that, and just imagine that scene of us recording that. and you could be, like, right there with us when you're listening to it. Um, yeah, that was a really impactful moment because I felt like Lucy was al she's always there. You know, she's always there. The lessons she taught me, the memories she gave me, all of it. And I become very, very close friends with her sons. I mean, I call 'em my brothers. And that longevity gene is good. I'm telling you, they look they look amazing. They have great energy. They take great care of themselves. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was one of those things. Everybody has something in their life that if you had to do a highlight reel, um, she'd be on my highlight reel. Those years would be definitely on my highlight reel.
No, no doubt, Rosalie. Wow. Um, and Judy, we have this whole industry built around longevity, stuff like we hear about biohacking, or supplements or tests or trackers or this constant self-monitoring. Now, I mean, it can turn into this obsession, and the solution here can sometimes become the problem. So, like this fear-driven project to avoid aging. So, from your vantage point, can this pursuit of longevity, can it actually backfire? Because, like, it can trying too hard to live longer become something that stresses people out and ironically harm their health. Just exactly that I was, saying that, as adult, we always feel that, if there is something that can actually flush all the worries or tensions out of our lives, especially when it comes to aging.
I think it definitely can backfire. Out of the people I interviewed, not one of them ever had Botox. You know, they 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 just embraced their bodies, their age. They dressed the best they could. They took care of themselves the best they could, and and they just enjoyed life. They weren't looking in the mirror and picking themselves apart. And I think when we think about longevity, we think about it from the standpoint of what we think we should look like. And, the mirror doesn't tell the whole story, at all. I think if we really want to embrace longevity, we we actually think back to the strokes on the canvas and we think, what is the picture of my life need to look like? Stop focusing on the mirror and start thinking about the canvas that you're creating of your life. What's the legacy that you're leaving? What are you still contributing to society? I guarantee that nobody sits in the casket and somebody looks over them and said, "Man, they really should have dyed their hair." You know? No, that isn't even a thing. You know, when you go to a funeral and people are paying tribute to someone, they're talking about the memories. They're talking about the impact that person had on them. There No one is saying, "Well, they just would have lost 10 more pounds. We coulda got them a smaller casket." I mean, like, that's not it's not a thing. Nobody is concerned about that. The looks and the longevity, what they wanna know is, did you when you still had breath in you, did you have a purpose, and were you living that purpose, and were you contributing to society, to your family, and to yourself?
Hmm, absolutely makes sense. And I think this reframe is huge, because um it's nuanced. Like, maybe we can use these tools and testing, or metrics or numbers as, information, not as something that, like a crutch, or not as a religion. Like, if we are tracking 40 metrics, but then we have no friends, we have no one to talk about, or to look up to, I think it's not a longevity strategy. I think it's more towards like a loneliness strategy.
Oh, absolutely. As the CEO at Executive Medicine of Texas, we're in the longevity space, but we're in it from the standpoint of let's let's look at your body from a healthy standpoint.
Mm.
Let's help you understand what's going on in your life with your heart and your brain and your lungs and all these things. Let's get on top of things early, like make sure that you don't have polyps, which turn into colon cancer. Let's take care of things on the inside so that you can live healthier. In your intro, you talked about lifespan versus health span.
Mm.
We're all about increasing that health span. If you want to live in your purpose and you want to leave a legacy, the healthier you are, the more able you are to do that.
Well, no doubt. That is no doubt. And before we conclude, I think, and this I've heard from so many people. Sometimes, even I have also kind of, I mean, I'll not be lying, but I also sometimes think that, and especially for centenarians, that, it's genetics. Um, yeah, I mean, but they just have good genes, and that's why it's not for me. So, from your research and your work, Judy, how much of longevity is actually genetics, and how much is lifestyle and environment that we can actually influence? And I know for the fact, Judy, that there is, because recently I was going through a lot of conversation around this, that um, if your parents, you feel that, some of the genetic related has been passed on, but then in your lifetime there is a possibility of reversing it, probably through good lifestyle or good environment, or maybe it can be behavioral, it can be physical or biological. But then what's your opinion on this?
Well, I think we talk a lot about genetics. Oh, I don't know, my grandfather died at 60 and my aunt died of this and I don't know that I'm going to live long. We hear this a lot out of people and we're like, "Okay, let's back up. Let's talk about epigenetics." Because what a lot of people don't understand is you could have a genetic predisposition to something, the heart disease, Alzheimer's, you name it. You can have these predispositions, but it's really about, are you going to turn them on or not turn them on? For example, my husband's father died of leukemia, but he worked in an iron foundry. So, years ago at an iron foundry, of course you're going to die of disease because you're inhaling pollutants all the time. Um, so you think about how much is coming from the environment, how much is coming from epigenetics. My mother, who has since passed away, had Alzheimer's,
Mhm.
but my mother also didn't take care of herself in an anti-Alzheimer's way. I mean, she literally slept 4 or 5 hours a night. We know now that the importance of sleeping and what actually happens, because we use functional MRI to tell us that when we sleep, the brain actually washes itself like a washing machine and gets rid of those plaques and things. And the best way you can prevent things like dementia and Alzheimer's is to get adequate sleep. And obviously to have an anti-inflammatory diet and such. So there's a lot of things that we can learn about ourselves genetically. I mean, I have my genetics sequenced. I have 2 of the Alzheimer's genes, but I really looked at that from the standpoint of, this is good information for me to know, because it's going to be the fire that lights underneath me to say, "Oh, I need to get my 8 hours of sleep. I need to make sure I'm exercising regularly. No, I don't need those sugary drinks. No, I don't want to have a high fat diet." I mean, all of these things, they're driven by data. They're driven by what I already know about myself. And it also gives us a sense of control, because if you know what you're up against, or you know what could happen if you don't turn, if you don't turn away the things that could harm you, the things that work against you, then you kind of know, all right, I'm making a choice here. I'm making a choice of what is What is my future going to look like? Am I going to control the things I can control? You can't change your genetics. Maybe someday you can, but you can take control of your epigenetics.
Exactly. And before we wrap up, Judy, okay, is there any, let's say, a starter pack for listeners who would now they want to live longer and better, like any non-negotiable behaviors that you would like to put in that pack, and our listeners can take that as the immediate actionables from this conversation.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that maybe people wouldn't think about. No artificial sweeteners. Absolutely not. Do not do artificial sweeteners. So this is like your aspartame and, if the packet that your sweetener has its colored packet, don't put it in your food. You know, it color it, all pastels so it looks like it's harmless. It actually ruins your gut microbiome and it is linked to all kinds of diseases. Just don't do it. In several countries, it's illegal. So that is number one. Number two is limit, as long as we're staying kind of on things we're ingesting, limit packaged and processed foods. Uh, if you look at something and it doesn't expire for 10 years, do you really want to put it in your body? Because we aren't meant to hold things and preserve things inside of our body for 10 years. So really stick to your fresh fruits, your vegetables, and so forth. If you're going to eat meat, do it sparingly. Um, I think that's important from that. We talked about sleep. Sleep is a non-negotiable. You have to get your sleep. And then work. I mean, I shared earlier that I was a third generation workaholic. And, in Japan, on the death certificates, they actually have a Japanese word that means worked to death.
Mm.
It, we know that working ridiculous hours can lead to your death. You can die from working too much, too hard, too long. So I think managing that downtime and making downtime a priority. I still struggle with this a little bit, but I'm so much better than I was before I met Lucille. But really managing that and realizing that taking time for yourself and taking time to relax and reset is not a sin. It's something you really need to do. It's a must have.
It is, and personally, I mean, this is something that I will very, very openly, without any guilt or shame, justify. It is not a sin to pause. It is not a sin to take a break, because I think nobody else is going to come and save me. But also, I think one thing that you and Lucille, I think, um, she's teaching all of us is that, um, you know, especially in today's day and age, let us stay connected, not through social media or WhatsApp or messaging or call. But I think it's very important to have, you know, uh, people or friends or loved ones with whom you can share, with whom you can talk. And I think isolation is also now becoming one of the major reasons behind not only just the physical aspect, but also the mental health concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel almost like I'm preaching to the choir a little bit because I think you know this, you understand this. I think intuitively
Mm.
we know what's good for us and what's not good for us and what we need to do. Just like those elementary school kids, we know.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. I mean, this has been such a brilliant and such a beautiful, beautiful conversation, Judy. So, of course, as a ritual, I have to ask you if listeners they would like to connect with you, get a hold of the books and your audiobook, and also listen to your podcast. What would be the easiest way to do that?
They can go to judygaman.com, JUDYGAMAN.com, or, the book, they can go on Amazon. The book and audiobook are readily available. So I think, I think just connecting, on any of those ways would be great. If you're interested in executive medicine of Texas, people fly in from all over the globe to see us. You can go to emtexas.com, and if you can link that, that would be great. emtexas.com.
Wonderful. Listeners, I'll make sure that I have all the links mentioned in the show notes for all of you. So reach out to Judy, check out her podcast, Stadium America, and also check out E in Texas. So just refer to the show notes along with this episode. And I think, you know, this has been such, personally for me as well, listeners, such um, a game changing conversation because we called out the anxiety side of the longevity culture. We challenged the good genes excuse and we put those rule breaker stories in context. Most importantly, I think Judy reminded us that mindful longevity is not about fear of death, it is about respect for life, for this day, for this breathe, for this breath, this relationship, this walk you could take after closing this episode. So, Judy, once again, thank you so, so much. This is really a gift, and thank you so much for giving us this gift.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So, thank you to all the listeners for tuning into this episode of The Mindful Journey. I'm your host, Sana, and remember, you cannot control everything in life, but you can control how you show up for your body, your mind, and your relationships today. Thank you.